But the senator, while indoctrinated, could not explain his toxicity.
You should not listen to men's rights advocates if you want to know what they have to say.
Let's begin it.
Number ZZ9 plural Z alpha. Number ZZ9.
And hello and welcome to HBR Talk 264, Modern Medicine Responds to Incels. I'm your host, Hannah Wallen, here with Incel Project creator Naama Kates, Nonsense Annihilator Lauren Brooks, and the personification of perceptivity, Mike Stevenson, to get a look at a new article on a new syndrome in psychological medicine, Incel Complex. But before we get to that, we gotta do what we gotta do. As always, Honey Badger Radio dishes out a smorgasbord of thought-provoking discussions, and as experiences both recent and long past have demonstrated, the provoked thoughts are fighting back. They've made it clear that for people like us, relying on third-party payment platforms like Patreon to fund our work is treading on thin ice, or building our house in the path of a rapidly growing wildfire. In light of this, we strongly encourage our supporters to switch at least their support for us to feedthebadger.com, the most stable way to help us out. And if you want to tip us directly, instead of relying on any social media platform's tip jar, the link for that is feedthebadger.com/justthetip. And as always, the same risk applies to our social media platforms, which is why you should further provoke the thought police by tracking our thought-provoking discussions on honeybadgerbrigade.com, where you can find your way to all of our content, as well as a link to feedthebadger.com in the drop-down menu at the top of the page. And with that, we're going to move on. When I saw this article, initially my heart dropped. I thought, well, there you go. They're going to treat being sad about being lonely and being angry about being bullied as forms of mental illness and indications of violence now. Having looked through the article, though it's short, there's clearly more to it than that, and this approach isn't just another example of black and white thinking we usually see from the establishment. Although I've seen this writer's name before and just can't place it. And it's... I don't have a good feeling of, did I like this person's writing before? I just can't remember what we've read from this writer before. But I think there's a lot more than she's written about here. So any thoughts on this before we dive into it?
First of all, good to be back with you guys, as always.
Yeah, it's good to have you.
Yeah, especially on this topic, huh?
Yeah.
So this piece, I read it. You're right. It's not the typical stigmatizing, black and white, demonizing pablum we tend to get from the establishment, which is because it's based on a study from someone named William Costello, who was at Brunel University, I think, at the time, and is now studying with David Buslabs in Austin, evolutionary psychology. He's a good friend of mine. I had him on the podcast way back when, days of yore, before he did any of this great work, and actually sort of helped him, promoted him a lot in the incel community, the incelosphere, before he got this study started. So this study, which had 272 incel respondents, is one of the very few studies done in good faith, I would say, about this community, where, it employed actual surveys of incels. He actually spoke to them. It wasn't just like word scraping and nonsense like the other ones do.
Oh, that's
so
good.
That's
good.
Yeah. He's definitely in good faith, and he's currently working on his second study, which I think was funded by the Home Office in the UK, which goes a little bit more in depth into incels, like mate preferences and all kinds of other interesting things. So they're doing real honest work, and this study was definitely real and definitely honest. And he basically just studied incel self-perception, their victimhood. There's a scale of like victimhood compared to the control population. And it was a good study, and it found rates of depression, rates of autism spectrum disorder, rates of, inferiority and things like that. And also disproved and debunked a lot of commonly held beliefs about incels, like that they're right wing, etc. I think he found that it was pretty evenly split politically, and they weren't very political. So lots of great stuff.
Oh, that's excellent.
Yeah, it's really good work. His studies and another woman named Sofia Moskalenko that I was involved with have done good work. Well, one thing this study did not say was incel syndrome. That term doesn't come from the author. It comes from the author of this piece, I guess. Not the author of the study. I have never heard William Costello or anyone else in academia refer to such a thing. And the fact that, I think this also gets a few things wrong, too, when it talks about how many of them have tried mental health care and whether they found it effective or not. I think the idea for what William Costello is doing is basically one of his ideas, I believe, is that in mental health care, people aren't trained. They're not really informed about what incels are and how much this can affect people, and maybe certain tendencies that are important for them to know, like about evolutionary psychology, so they can maybe discuss these things with potential clients that they have. It's more about like educating therapists, possibly, that if they have a client that comes in and says, I have all these other issues, I'm also an incel, they'll know what that means. It's not about saying all incels are mentally ill and that's a cause of mental illness. Absolutely not. So that was the first problem I had when I saw the article. I was like, oh gosh, this is really going to be awful. And then I read it and I'm like, this is kind of a mixed bag. So like the first thing, she gives some key takeaways, and she gives a definition for Incel Complex, and it kind of interested me. That first bullet point, which we can see, I think, on the screen here. There we go. I make it a little more visible. Says Incel Complex is a condition where people are involuntarily celibate and lack the ability to form deep, intimate sexual relations, which results in loneliness, depression, and possibly violent thoughts. So they've defined this. Now, granted, it didn't come from the research, but clearly there is a goal here. And I have a theory on why that happened, because I think me recognizing the name kind of makes me wonder if, we're looking at someone going at this research from a feminist perspective, because feminists have specifically attacked the incel community as misogynistic, as violent, entitled. And they think that the misogyny is the root of like this problem, as if they see it as like, person is misogynistic, therefore they are incel, that makes them mentally ill. Yeah. Kind of. Yeah. So
they're going backwards.
And I think, unfortunately, in this society, it's almost impossible anywhere you look to not find some kind of feminist influence behind, their agenda. Mm-hmm. So Yeah. It,
Yeah, and
so
that's the tough thing. So it's a lot
Unless
like
you're, yeah, unless you're looking in a specifically like an outlet that's like considered contrarian or something like
yeah.
that.
Yeah, it's a lot like swimming in a lake that's full of glass, and it's floating in the water, and you're trying to deal with the water, but you have all this glass that you're trying to avoid. And I think it kind of gets into everything, it grinds into everything, it cuts into everything, and it does a lot of damage because this is a phenomenon within our society that there are some people who are more socially adept and there are some people who are less socially adept. There are some people who are so lacking in aptitude for ability to connect with other people that it creates pain and suffering for them and denies them the normal experience, the healthy normal experience of social connection. And that isn't something that you can just look at and say, well, shame on them for lacking, something like be like saying shame on someone in a wheelchair for lacking the ability to walk. Like it's a normal part of human development that if something happens that prevents that part of human development from occurring in an individual, that's a handicap.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what they mean by lack the ability to form deep, intimate and sexual relations, because that's wording that's typically used in descriptions of actual syndromes in the DSM and what have you. Whereas being an incel, as far as I know, as far as anyone I know knows, is it's a circumstance.
Right. It's a result.
Somebody could perfectly have the ability to form deep, intimate and sexual relations, but for whatever reason they haven't. Those could be external reasons. They could be just random reasons. It just hasn't happened yet.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that's getting pulled into this definition.
I think it's implied.
Really shouldn't
Yeah.
be for that purpose. Yeah.
I think it's implied, and I think it's important to be aware of a lot of the characterological tendencies in the community that might in fact make it more difficult to form social bonds, especially intimate social bonds, which can be any number of things. They can be upbringing, they can be being on the spectrum is a big one. Any number of things. A lot of these things often are factors. They're not the defining factors of what being an incel is. That is a circumstance. This does kind of assume that all incels have the mindset and
Right.
that therefore treating the mindset would treat the incel. So that's not true. But, I think it's still, I don't think it's in bad faith to kind of try to look at it that way or.
Yeah, I think in terms of the the profession of psychological treatment, you have like two groups of people. You have people who go into it with sort of a profiteering attitude, and you have people that go into it with more of an altruistic motive. And the profiteering motive gets subdivided between people who are profiteering in terms of money, and I think people who have a savior complex that don't recognize it. And you get if you mix feminism with the savior complex, then you get this attitude of looking down on incels from on high. And I've seen that in a few discussions on Twitter where somebody is like, well, we could help these people if we could just get them to act normal.
Yeah.
And
Right.
If they could just do that.
Yeah. I also really interestingly I think I mentioned it last time I was here, had an incel on the show who is a psychotherapist from the UK. And he was really interesting because he just talked about how difficult it is for therapists to even have that conversation with someone in their chair if the person says, well, I'm ugly or I'm not, I'm mundane, I'm this, I'm that, and that's why I can't find a relationship. And he's like, because of the way therapists are, it's really hard for them to ever just say yeah, that might possibly be true. It makes them feel bad. So yeah.
Well, and you also have and I'm not a therapist, but I did go a ways into studying it with the intention. And one of the things that I always had as a goal when I have tried to help people around me is, all right, so that's a result. Where somebody says, I can't get into a relationship because I'm ugly. The result is they feel they can't get into a relationship because they're ugly. So you have to start looking at the cause. And included in that cause may be that they are not conventionally attractive. That's a real thing. It happens to people. It's not like I could say right now, I am not conventionally attractive. And it gets pointed out to me when I do face video, like video that shows my face, because people can see my teeth, and my teeth are a mess right now. Like they're really a mess. Like there's no fixing that without serious expensive dental care. And if somebody doesn't like what I say, they call my teeth ugly. And it's like I'm kind of stoic about that because I already know that and it doesn't bother me. And it's just they're stating a fact, and I don't care if they find me attractive or not because that's not the goal of the video, right? But if I was trying to get into a relationship, if I was not a 50-year-old grandma who didn't have to do all that, and I was trying to date right now, and the response of all the people around me was, get away from me, your teeth are ugly, there'd be a totally different response there, and it would affect my self-esteem probably. And that's something that like you go through as a person trying to help another individual deal with pain and suffering that they're trying to work their way through, and not be despondent and not be suicidal, or if they're experiencing any kind of violent ideation, which does happen with people that are going through a rough time. And it's not limited to people who are involuntarily celibate. People who are bullying victims, people who have experienced any kind of trauma go through that. Like, when I was 10, we were in a car accident, my mother, my grandmother, and me, and my mom almost died in that accident. And I saw her dying, and it was very traumatic. I was in my 40s before I could talk about it without having a panic attack. And I like, you guys all know me, I'm not the type that you expect to have a panic attack. I would get out of breath and be unable to talk. And that, when I was in my teens, I had violent ideation around drunk driving. And that was a really rough experience because I knew people that were just perfectly okay with having a couple of beers and then getting behind the wheel of a car. And somebody that did that almost killed my mother right in front of me. And I had to work through that. Like, that was part of the reason why I went into anger management. And it wasn't, I didn't go to an anger management specialist. I went to a psychologist for teenagers. And that was a really interesting experience, because the first thing that we went through was, yes, your anger is legitimate, your response is not. Mm-hmm. And he was blunt. He was not from the United States. He was from Korea. And so his English was very good, but my ability to understand his accent sucked. And we had to communicate in shorter sentences and very clear points. He had to speak to me like my English was bad. And we didn't, so that, like, that whole situation, basically, when I look at this and this attempt at recognizing what incels are going through and trying to figure out, well, what do we do about this to help them, and what do we do about this in situations where somebody might actually become a threat, which I think that's more than way overblown in media, especially.
It's almost non-existent, to be honest. It is almost non-existent. It's almost statistically negligible compared to any other population.
And some of the cases are mischaracterized, like
right.
Most
of them are. Almost all of them are. I know all of those cases by heart, and almost all of them can be completely taken apart. So that threat that's another headline. It's a headline seller. It's a profit maker. It allows nonprofits and governmental NGOs to, get in and sell some trainings and give some talks. And I've done some of those, so I'm not saying that that's always, nefarious or always completely cynically done. But for the most part, that's what that's about. Incels really, if you it just doesn't make sense to look at them that way. It's
Right.
too any of this stuff really over predicts those kind of attacks. Those attacks happen so much, and they don't really happen so much at all, period, statistically. But even given the ones that do, like, the motives are just, we know nothing about any of that, and incel has nothing to do with it.
Well, and it's looking at it as a one aspect, one cause phenomenon is really dumb too.
Like a univariate issue is ridiculous.
Right. Because when you look into the lives of the people involved, you discover that, hey, there's a whole ton of crap going on here, and all of it is relevant and not just this one thing. But
right.
And like the biggest worry I would have if I was actually a therapist and somebody came to me and they said I have these things going on and I'm also an incel, is that if they're experiencing depression, that experience is going to make it worse, and that they might be a suicide risk, because I know social isolation is one of the big contributing factors to suicide.
Yeah.
So,
of course it is. Like, when I've had counselors ask me, like, well, what do you think? How should we treat incels? It's like, don't look at that. This whole thing, Incel Complex, is wrong. And it's just like everything else in this piece. It's backwards. Like, if they're an incel, they're an incel. It doesn't mean they have any kind of mental health issues.
Right.
Whatever mental health issues they have, you treat those with the awareness that one of their main issues is this loneliness and inability to find a relationship. And you can start to look at causes for that or alternatives for that if they really think it's about their appearance or maybe where they live or something like that, and there's nothing that behaviorally can help. Then, like the incel I had on my show that was a therapist, he's like, I just learned to accept that about myself and to find other meaning in my life. And that's very difficult for people to do, obviously, but that has to be something you're able to consider. Either way, pathologizing this is not.
And that's why
I just wanted to say that, like, I think one of the biggest bullies is ourselves. And I think that's what's happening with a good percentage of these quote unquote incels. I think they bully themselves into demeaning themselves, into thinking that they're lesser than, and they can't get out of their own mindset, their own way of thinking.
100%. That's a lot of them. Yeah.
And it's we talk about other bullies, right? Other people are bullying me. Well, no, I think a lot of times we just really demean ourselves, and it's unhealthy. And you got to start at the beginning, and the beginning is with you. It's how do you look at life? How do you see yourself? And if you're looking at yourself in a negative light, if you think that everything is just going to be all, it's not going to go your way, if you're just have this pessimistic life or outlook about life, then you're going to attract that negativity. And
yeah, like, I think that's undeniably true, and a lot of incels feel like they're being gaslit when people say that. They're like, well, we're just saying how it is. And, you're telling me that, like, my attitude is going to fix my face, et cetera, et cetera. Like, so I can respect that too. And I understand why the forums are there. People are very critical of the forums because there's so much negative self-talk and they're very fatalistic, like the black pill and everything. But, like, the truth is, I think the forums, they exist. Obviously, I don't believe in censorship. I have seen instances where the forums have provided, like, friendships for people that have a really hard time with those, and, like, a place to kind of vent and stuff. So they've been helpful in a way. And a lot of it is just joking and kind of camaraderie. But, that being said, that outlook is very unhealthy. And it also, I've had many people who said that, like, it's made them more depressed and stuff. Because, if you're, like you said, if you're fixating on all, like, what you believe are your worst features and how you're doomed and you lost the genetic lottery and stuff, like, it's not going to help things. Usually.
Yeah. I went to school with a kid who had muscular dystrophy, passed away when he was 13 years old. And he was, by the time I met him, he was already in a wheelchair. He had to have an electric wheelchair. He couldn't do much of anything with his body. Like it was a neat device for the time. Like I met him in 1983, 82, somewhere in there. And so it was a normal looking wheelchair with a motor and a battery and a joystick, like you would have on a video game, with a ball for him to hold on to at the top of the joystick, because it's hard to just grip something if your muscles don't work. Muscular dystrophy takes away the function of the muscles in the body over time, and it eventually takes away the function of the heart. And you eventually pass away from it. But I never saw this kid look at life in terms of what he couldn't do. And it changed everything about how I looked at life. I don't know if Doug ever understood the gift that he was to everybody who knew him. But it makes a total difference in the way that you look at what you can or can't do in your life. We, in recess and gym class and things like that, we did everything we could to include Doug in everything that we could. So, for instance, when we played dodgeball, like, we had rules for everybody, and then we had rules for how can Doug participate. Nobody else is carrying around a big object that if you hit that object, they're out. So hitting his wheelchair means nothing. He's not out from that. And, it's not part of his body, and he doesn't get a choice in whether it's attached to him or not. So, but if he bats it, that's his only way of hitting something. So if he bats it with the wheelchair and it hits you, you're out. And that was how he could get people out. And he was good enough at controlling that wheelchair that he was not usually the first person out. He wasn't usually the last person out. He was usually right in the middle of the bunch, right? And another friend...
Yeah, I like I like that it's not only like making the, the quote-unquote handicap for him, where it was easier for him to do something. It was also making something like more difficult,
right.
That his whole entity didn't count. So there's some balance there.
And he still had to aim to hit people. He had to,
right.
There was some serious brain work in using that wheelchair as a bat to hit that ball to hit you, and turning it around so that, and of course, nobody was going to bean him, because muscle flaccidity from muscular dystrophy would make him bruise a lot easier. And, so we had, give and take with that, right? But that was something that we worked out as a group together, because his whole outlook was, all right, everybody's doing this. What do we need to do to make it so I can participate? And I think we're in a situation where our whole society does the exact polar opposite to incels.
Yes.
And it's almost like we're telling incels, well, yeah, you have some aspect of your life is socially crippling you. And whether it's appearance, whether it's autism, whether it's experience, whether it's where you live, are you the only gay man in your community because the community only has 500 people in it? I met somebody not too long ago on Twitter that had been the reason he was an incel. He was living in a very, very small community, and he was the only gay man in his community, and the next community was miles away. So he was an incel.
Location cells. Yep, that's kind of like the guy I had on the show too. He wasn't willing to move into a more urban area.
Right. And instead of looking at this, all right, so this is in the way of your social interaction with other people, or this is in the way of forming the types of relationships that you want to form. How do we maneuver around that? How do we eliminate it? How do we climb over it? How do we give you the wheelchair for your legs that aren't working socially? And we're not there. Society is looking at these people and how shame on you for not having working legs. What's wrong with you? How dare you be different from other people? You must be violent. And I guess that's why, like, the next 2 bullet points in this article, Incel Complex is not yet recognized as a psychological condition. I read that and I'm like, I wanted to scream, no shit, Sherlock. It's not yet recognized as a psychological condition, although more cases fitting the description of Incel Complex are emerging. Then it goes on, while there is no specific proven treatment, many types of therapies, including existential therapy and narrative therapy, could prove effective at aiding patients exhibiting this complex.
What?
So, like, well, this isn't a real mental health condition, but here's how we're going to treat it.
Right, with like these very esoteric, like, hardly practiced, kind of mumbo jumbo treatments that are not evidence at all.
Yeah. And all I can think of is, like, can we maybe start by looking at cause and effect before we go into all of this mumbo jumbo and blaming the individual?
No, that's not possible. That's not possible. We've got men to blame, Hannah.
Yeah, that's true. So now the writer is going to give a little history. The term incel was first coined to describe a group of people from all genders, which I love that, because when I first started hearing the term incel, the concept of 72 genders was not a mainstream discussion at all. That was a Tumblr thing. But people from all genders who struggled to form intimate and sexual relationships despite their desire for them. Over time, the incel community, which exists almost exclusively online, which I want to take issue with that wording too. It exists almost exclusively online. Well,
that's straight from like every presentation I've ever given and my podcast, so I'm not going to quibble too much with it. As a community, it does exist almost entirely online. Like, incels only discuss it online. They only talk to other incels online. They don't like identify that way.
They don't meet up.
Yeah, they don't meet up. They probably should, but they don't. Yeah. And they tell most people in their lives that they know that they're incels a lot of the time. So that's kind of what I meant by that, and maybe what they mean.
I hope that's what they meant by that, because when I see that, and they say the same thing about us, and they said the same thing about us for years, men's rights activists, us, and our community. We have a complex community. It's rather large, and I would actually say it's becoming more of a population demographic than a community at this point. When you have more than 250,000 subscribers to the men's rights subreddit, that looks a lot like a population rather than just a community. Yeah. And I mean that's a lot of people.
And events and meetups and stuff, right?
Right, and we've been talked about as if we only exist online, and the way that they use that phrase, when feminists use that phrase about us, the way they use that phrasing is, it seems intended to indicate that we are men's rights activists online and something else in our real lives, or that we're not real people. And like that, so that's why I want to take issue with this for a minute. I don't like seeing feminists or writers that are disparaging to the incel population, because that's a pretty big population too. Like using it. I can understand pointing out, though, that most of their activity as a community is online.
Yeah, I thought it was important to point out what is
You're breaking up. Hang on a second. And there's a lot of background noise.
Is this better now?
Yeah, that's better.
Okay. Sorry about that. I thought it was important to point out initially, just because one of the issues that they have is they have so much shame often about being incels that they don't or can't talk about this very important part of their life and their identity and their struggles with anybody they know, because they feel they'll be judged for it. So that's why they usually just kind of communicate online and have these online spaces where they talk about this stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense. That does make sense. And I think the community is more made up of people who have who've suffered because of it, and specifically have a need to discuss it with other people, and have a need for some sort of connection that revolves around discussing it, or recognizing the problem, trying to solve, like, I have this hurdle between me and other people or whatever, where I think if you look at the male population of the world, like worldwide, I would put money on the idea that men who are involuntarily celibate far outnumber men who are not, because of the way we've learned about women being choosy. I think women who are involuntarily celibate might actually, especially younger women who are of dating age, might actually outnumber those who are not as well, because a lot of times people will not connect with each other just based on being told not superfluous things, but surface things that should be their standards, and not things that people actually connect over. And so the phenomenon that we see is the people who are recognizing that lack of connection can be a problem for a person and wanting to talk about it. I think underneath that, there's an iceberg of people who are accustomed to a lack of connection that aren't talking about it.
And it's really, if I could speak from like a personal standpoint, like it's hard when you feel like you have nobody to talk to, right? Because everybody, like your family, the people that you know who aren't, the peripheral people around you will say, oh, well, go talk to a therapist. And it's like there's a whole other layer of I don't want to say worthlessness, but
like feeling like you're a burden.
Well, I mean, of course there's feeling like you're a burden, but like if the only person that I can go talk to about my life is a therapist that I have to pay for, then it's like I have to pay someone to give a fuck about my life.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And
who wants to talk to the therapist? Like, really, it's unless you have a specific issue that you understand is like, trauma or some kind of condition that you understand, like, okay, this is a complex thing and maybe I want professional help with it. Just the idea of like needing to pay somebody because you've got regular human struggles in your life is not, it's very depressing.
Well, I mean, it's that, yes, but the entire idea that there's nobody else that you can talk to or go to in your life.
Yeah,
right?
That is.
That's horrible.
That is something that would be very depressing, and painful.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think it would feel like being told, well, if nobody will talk to you, go pay somebody to talk to you. If nobody will listen to you, go pay somebody to listen to you. By somebody who could just maybe listen
themselves.
And it's and it's different from like somebody saying, gosh, what you're going through is actually complicated enough that maybe you need some help analyzing it professionally to figure out what to do and how to improve your situation. This is just, well, I need somebody to talk to about this, or somebody to listen to me, and then like, well, go pay somebody. And like, honestly, that almost makes therapy seem like prostitution.
I was just going to say the same thing. Incels are told all the time by people online saying like, oh, they can't get laid, just, go see a sex worker or something. And it's like, they don't want to have to pay for intimacy. And in the same way, a lot of people who are just lonely, or I can totally relate to this experience too. Like, I don't necessarily want to have to pay someone to just listen to me. It doesn't feel right. That kind of defeats the purpose.
Right. Yeah. Because there's this longing of wanting there to be someone who knows your situation so intimately so that you don't have to go through every single detail. Right? Because stories they have to be unraveled for people to really get the full nuance of where someone is in a certain situation in their life, right?
Yeah, they need to know who the people are that you're talking about, what the history is. They need to know you.
Exactly. And you can't just pay someone to do that. Money doesn't buy that kind of experience. So to feel like your last resort is to pay a therapist to talk to you, and again, you would have to have the money and the time to spend with someone so that they could understand all of that. Unless you happen upon a great therapist who can, be in tune with you enough to understand the things that you're saying. But even still, it just doesn't hit the mark.
And I think a really responsible, ethical therapist would say, sorry about that. Like, I'm actually, because I was in therapy for a few years with someone really good. And when I would just talk about kind of life things, a lot of the times they would say, okay, well, I'm not just here to kind of like listen to that as a friend. Like, we have to have like an objective and be working toward it. And it was like dealing with a trauma. So, that's not really the role of a therapist to just like be your friend like that.
No, and the amount of schooling that you get, to go to do that job, it would be kind of an insult to have somebody come in and just, I just want to talk about life. And in the 70s for a while there was a kind of a trend, like anybody that had money had a therapist, and there's licensed therapy where you do psychological therapy, and then there were people that were calling themselves therapists that was all they did was just listen. And I think there were I don't know if you guys are familiar with the old Dr. Demento show, but there were a number of songs on that show that were inspired by that trend of the something wrong with me trend, I guess is what I would call it, where, oh, I'm in therapy. Well, and actually you're just talking about, your daily life with this individual, and they're listening, and the stereotype of them saying, oh, that's very interesting, and how did that make you feel, over and over again. And then at the end, oh, you've helped me a lot, and the therapist has done absolutely nothing but listen.
Right.
And like that, I think a lot of people today have that image of the therapist. But when you go in with a problem like, I want to beat people up who drive drunk because my mom almost got killed. They're working through, all right, first of all, let's deal with the fact that you can't take responsibility for something that somebody else did, and you can't use that as an excuse to punish people who weren't involved in what happened, and things like that. They're looking at what can we do to make it so that you don't have this overwhelming impulse in your life, and you can move on and be yourself. And that's expensive, and it's professional work, it's labor, and it's something, it's a goal that a person has in going into that job, that if all you do is go in and talk about your life experiences and your feelings, and you don't actually try to solve anything, you're sort of undermining their career too. So when people make that, people set people up for failure when they give that advice, and then they also are dumping something onto the community of real psychologists that really, it's almost like starting a fight between two other people who didn't have a problem with each other until you came along. But yeah, so we were looking at this belief in this article. Now, let's see. We are at overtime. The incel community, which exists exclusively online, has become overwhelmingly dominated by heterosexual males who struggle with mental health problems and violence, and believe that women's sex and relationships are all things owed to them. Now, you had talked about some of the things in this article didn't come from the research that she cited. I would bet this is part of that.
That absolutely did not. That's not in any of the research.
And I from the people that I've met and talked to, it's also bullshit. Just, grade A bullshit. Like you could fertilize a farmer's field with this. But it's not good for any discussion about incels. I've not met anyone who thinks that women's sex and relationships are all things owed to them.
No. They absolutely don't feel that way. That's, completely just been astroturfed by the media. Incels actually want intimacy. They want to be wanted and desired, so they don't want to take anything from any woman in that respect. And also just the phrasing, it's been dominated overwhelmingly by heterosexual men, gives it ascribes them with some bad motives that they've overwhelmed this thing that existed before. No, it mostly is just heterosexual men, just because that's the community as it exists. And there's nothing, that kind of wording certainly does not come from any research.
Right. And I would say the overwhelming majority of the population is either heterosexual or predominantly heterosexual. If you look at bisexuals, a lot of us have a preference for one sex or the other more. I would say I'm more heterosexual, but not entirely. And so there's a lot of people who live as heterosexuals. I'm married to a man, and that's not going to change ever. So
right.
I'm when I say till death do us part, I mean it, and so people would refer to me as a heterosexual, even though when you look at people that you're attracted to in movies or on television or models and stuff like that, I'm looking at both sexes. That's not going to change either, ever. So there's probably a lot more within the population that are predominantly heterosexual or lean more toward heterosexual, even if they're not fully heterosexual. So of course it's going to be dominated by heterosexuality.
Yeah, and that's also just the community. I've had a couple gay incels on the show or write to me or whatever. Mostly the community feels that it's women's standards, etc., that creates inceldom. So there's kind of a lot of the ones that read the black pill and everything,
right,
believe that. So that's why they think that gay men and women can't be incels. But that's just one of the part of the thinking of the community. It's not this nefarious, dominated by men and now they're violent kind of bullshit.
And it's not even all wrong thinking, because you look at social programming that we get growing up. Women and girls are told to shop around, right? And men and boys are told to earn a relationship. And even though that they're told to earn a relationship, they're not told that they're owed one. That there's some magical, you earn this relationship and you get one. It's, you have to keep trying. Obviously, you have to keep working on yourself, and you have to keep improving yourself. And women and girls are not it's not exclusively, you don't have to do that, but to the degree that men and boys are told, you have to work on yourself. Nobody owes you a relationship. You have to earn the woman's affection and so on. We don't get told that as much. We don't get anywhere near that.
That's a very good point. You're absolutely right. In society, it's kind of the other way around. That's sometimes what these men are reacting to, I think, is that they are told they have to work for it more, where women aren't. And that's what these writers, the writer of this piece, think is so outrageous, that because the writer of this piece probably does believe that women shouldn't really have to work for it. Implicitly, they're probably not aware of it. It's probably kind of subconscious, but They probably do that. But the fact that any men would believe that is outrageous and offensive, and in fact they don't even believe that. So there's that too.
Yeah. And it's we do get told you have to look pretty, you have to try to be feminine, you gotta be social and so on, be nice to people and stuff. But at the same time, we're not told that we have to be prepared to support a partner. We're not told that we have to be the driver of the romance. Bring how many people advise their daughters to get their boyfriend flowers?
Right. It's probably becoming a little bit more equitable, I guess, today, or egalitarian, if that's the word you want to use today. But like the mythos, the general thinking and the stories that everyone's told, men are sort of fighting for the woman's affections. Like that's chivalry and everything.
Right. So when these writers that write this type of article and the people that they sort of base their beliefs on, I guess the ideology behind it, the feminist ideology behind it, when that all manifests into an article like this, I think a lot of it is outrage that guys have noticed that in terms of romance and the formation of intimate partnerships, women have it a little easier than men. We don't have to do as much work. We're the prize, and therefore we can, to a degree, just if we so choose, sit back and let somebody come for us. And you have to be in the lower end of attractiveness, like where people rate 1 to 10, you have to hit 5 or below before you recognize that, actually some work should go into your end of the relationship too, because you're not getting any. Nobody's chasing you, right? And I think a lot of things that incel women understand that women who are not incels don't as easily understand come out in those forums as well. And I've only talked to a couple of gals, and only very briefly, but that was one of the points that was driven home. Was like, a lot of women have it easy. A lot of women, just walk into a room and some guy in there somewhere is going to be attracted to them. But if you're the woman that doesn't happen with, you start to realize, maybe you have to be nice to people. You have to treat them like human beings if you want to get any attention from a guy, and maybe you have to be the pursuer. And that's difficult, I think, for women who have it easier and who have the feminist perspective is a victim complex perspective, right? So they have to make themselves, they look at everything through how they are victims of it. So as soon as they have it easy in terms of gaining the attention of a potential partner, and they have it easy enough that they gain attention whether they're looking for it or not, they become victims of that attention.
Yeah. Jesus.
And they treat recognizing their ability to get the attention they want and to be picky about their partners as an attack on them personally. And it's not an attack. It's a recognition that, hey, this is one of the things that makes life difficult for an incel. But
for one thing, they're called incels. We could go over the reason that women don't get called incels. There's this word femcel, but it's just a meme that no one identifies, certainly not on their sleeve.
Yeah.
Women don't get called these things. For one, because they still have the benefit of the old-fashioned word, virgin.
Yeah.
It's when a woman is a virgin, it's a good thing. It's an attractive thing, dare I say. When a man is a virgin, not so much. Quite the inverse, in fact. And even though it's the same word for both, it wasn't enough when it came to demonizing men and any identity we can give them. And so it wasn't enough to mock men for being virgins. We had to separate them from women. And when I say we, I mean society. I mean feminism. Forgot it. And so men have been attacked with this label, with this artifact of identity politics, which on the whole I think never should have happened. I've been yelling this since the 8 years ago when it first came up. Like, you do not need to adopt this identity. There's no point in it other than for the people who wish to demonize you. And even women, after no longer being virgins but then becoming involuntarily celibate, they don't have that word applied to them for the same reasons, because it's a word that's only applied for demonization. If a woman is not a virgin but wants to have a sexual relationship but is not in one, what do we call them? We don't call them anything. Unless they happen to have cats and then they're called crazy cat ladies, or if they drink wine and have nieces or nephews and then we call them wine aunts. It's never the actual circumstance itself that is mentioned. Because it's not considered important, because men are demonized for not having sexual relations with women. Women are not demonized for not having sexual relations with men. They're very often celebrated if they can play their cards right.
Right. We call them Ms.
Ms. Yeah.
Yes.
It's actually something that's changed to a small degree in society. Women have never been treated the same as men in terms of involuntary celibacy throughout their life, or the inability to form a relationship. But old maid, spinster, there's a few other terms that used to apply that, while they didn't have the negativity of what you would say about a man who got to those ages without a relationship that he obviously wanted, you did have sort of disparaging ways of describing women when they aged without marriage, without having children, and so on.
Spinsters.
And, yeah, like spinsters, I didn't even know. I'm sure it had to do with, spinning wheels or some such thing. Like, it's an old term. An old maid, is sort of like, what does a woman do if she doesn't have a husband to support her? Well, she has to get a job, right? Well, a lot of women, the jobs that they took were housekeeping, so there's where old maid comes from. But you didn't have dirty old woman, right? And even when women do go after younger men, they get this cool ass term, cougar. I know it sounds it's a predator, but at the same time, like, it's like the kind of thing you would name a car, like a sports car or something. It still doesn't carry the connotations of dirty old man, right? And the only other thing that existed historically was confirmed bachelor, and the confirmed bachelor was a guy who had rejected relationships with women, and he could be gay, and that was back then, that was considered to be a bad thing.
Yeah, that was, but there was still not much stigma to the name. It was either kind of code word for gay man, or just someone who was, a happy cad who had lots of girlfriends and whatever, but was never going to settle down.
Right. And so you didn't really have, like, women would be advised to stay away from that guy, right? But you didn't really have anything among women that there wasn't a nickname for women that disparaged them like that, like on that level. Stay away from this person. She's a confirmed bachelor. Stay away from this person. She's a dirty old maid, and like, no, just old maid. And, people might try to still set her up with the confirmed bachelor or the dirty old man, but they wouldn't look at her like she was a threat to children or a danger to the social order or anything like that. They just would feel sorry for her.
For her, yeah.
So we go on with this, again. She points out, the article points out, this condition is not officially recognized nor well understood. Risk assessment and psychotherapy are potential approaches to reduce the incidence of violence. So this is now going into, well, we're just going to approach this from the thing that happens the least, from the perspective of the thing that happens the least.
Yeah, I mean, and for something that's not very well understood, you sure are talking about it like you understand a little bit. So, a little bit more than you pretend the average bear knows. And even still, I will concede, you really don't kind of understand what you're talking about here.
Not even a little.
No. Goes on, Incel Complex is a phenomenon where people are involuntarily celibate, which in turn causes feelings of loneliness, depression, negativity, and here's where she does it again, oftentimes violence. And again, no basis for saying that.
It's a fucking weasel word. Where's this oftentimes? Yeah.
How frequently is oftentimes? Is that like 5 cases out of 10? Is that 8 cases out of 10? Is that 1 case in 1,000? 1 case in 1,000,000?
And per what? Is it per year, per month, per eon? Come on.
Oftentimes.
Slightly less often than often.
Yeah.
Somewhere on that wibbly scale.
Somewhere. According to a review of Incel Complex by researchers at Michigan State University, incel communities tend to blame women for the harm they believe women have done to them. And they are citing, down here at the bottom, I scrolled down too far because I'm a dumbass. Where is it? Oh, sources. They are citing criminal justice research team working to better understand the incel community. College of Science, Michigan State University, December 14, 2022. Thomas J.J. is the research, and it is at the bottom of the article. The article is linked in the low bar if anybody wants to go and look at that. But is this one of the ones that you were a participant in, Naama?
No, that's not it. And that's, I mean, the study that they keep referring to with 272 participants is William Costello's study.
Okay. And that one, did that one...
Andrew Thomas? Is that who it says?
I'm assuming. I probably shouldn't assume, but it says Thomas J.J. I'm going to open the research just to be sure. Slow computer.
Because there's only one.
J.J. Thomas. No, it's Thomas J.J., so it's J.J. Thomas, not...
Yeah, that's not... there's definitely only one study done surveying the population with 272 respondents. Yeah. So maybe they're referring to a study that refers to that. Probably.
Yeah, actually, this is not even a study. This is a report on a study.
Okay.
That's it's the one that when I opened it up, I'm like, this is not a study. But the study was done by Brenna Helm.
No. That might be another study that refers to that study, but that study was Costello.
Yeah. So you go all the way down to the bottom of this blurb on this article. It says Brenna Helm, Dr. Ryan Scrivens, Dr. Tom Holt, and Dr. Steve Chermak worked with Dr. Richard Frank at Simon Fraser University, who developed a custom-written web crawler that scraped data from the former R-Incel subreddit. So all they did was look at...
data scraping. That's what I'm telling you. There have been, since 2017 even, but more so 2018, there have been probably a dozen studies like this, probably more if you look at some of the smaller ones that were done by students about incels, and only 2 different researchers so far have actually polled the community. All the rest of them have been word scrapes of these forms.
The really dishonest thing about this is they don't tell you that they can, with this web crawler that they're using, they can look for specific words and phrases and focus on those, hone in on those, and then talk about them as though it's the majority of discussion.
Right, and also as if they're indicative. Like, there have been lots of studies like this where they, first of all, they calibrate things in all kinds of crazy ways. They assume that, like, quote unquote violent speech sometimes, or that using a phrase that they might consider racist. Curry cell, which is an affectionate name incels use for each other when they're, of South Asian descent, etc. That indicates racism, and that talking about rape, even though we're not saying what the context is, whether it's a joke, whether it's, a story, a memory, is indicative of some kind of violent impulse. And there's never been any evidence that any of that stuff is. It's just implied, and that's, they come up with all these assessments of a community based on an out of context, like AI machine learning of a forum where they determine the inputs going in, and then they tweak them according to what would make it look how they want it. You can completely manipulate it.
And a good way to describe this, I think, would be if we decided we were going to do this with feminist Twitter, and one of the things that we decided would be a search, a keyword, in the search would be the hashtag kill all men. Right? We get an even-handed look at the entire feminist community on Twitter if a significant part of the data we got came from comments left under the hashtag #KillAllMen.
Right. You'd get, I mean, like these toxicity scores that they're coming up with and all these projections would be heinous for feminist Twitter. And for probably lots of like, subreddits in general, like even ones that I'm a member of, like about TV shows and stuff, get pretty sometimes. That's just the nature of the internet. Like, these researchers are so out of touch sometimes with what they're studying. They kind of just like look at it as if it's an object, and they have no connection or human understanding of like, hey, this is just how people talk online sometimes. Like they completely lose that.
Well, I kind of wonder if they're doing it. There's another thing that goes into this, and it seems to me that it started in the mid 80s, and maybe even in the 70s, going back to the 70s in terms of education. When I was in school, and I noticed this because of my my parents being teachers, right? You had two different ways to learn something. You learned to understand a thing, or you learned it by rote. And so we learned to describe adverbs and adjectives in a particular way. Like adjectives modify nouns, and then we had this ridiculous long list of things that adverbs modify, which is everything except nouns. And my dad, when he was teaching this lesson, he would ask about this, and the students would rattle off the two definitions, and then he would say, okay, now what does that mean? And nobody would raise their hand, because nobody understood what it meant. They just knew, they couldn't describe to you what it meant to modify something. So then he had to go through and give examples, here, picture a truck in your mind, and they would all picture a truck in their mind, and then he would say, red truck. I just modified it. That's change. So an adjective modifies a noun by adding to your image of what that noun is. Tom is running, picture running. Running clumsily. The adverb just modified running. Now he's like half stumbling, right? So we go through this lesson, and the students now really understand when they're using these descriptions what they mean. When you go into the sciences and you look at research, a lot of times they're teaching stuff as you plug this method into, or you plug this method into your research module or whatever. You're gathering data based on that method. You use this arithmetic to manipulate the data to get a result, to look at, what does this result mean? And the students don't actually understand what they're doing. What does this research method actually do? What are you finding? What are you measuring? How much of the subject matter does this measurement cover? How applicable is it? And if they're in that shortcut mode of, well, I have learned this definition, I don't have to understand what it means, and they apply that in everything they do in education, and they just sort of skate by, then when they get a hold of a research thing like using a web crawler to troll for comments, and then analyzing what it means about the community on the basis of what they find, they're not going to have what it takes to sort out, I'm actually getting a good picture of this community versus I just engaged in significant confirmation bias and then vomited it all over the research publication community.
Right.
If that makes sense. And yes, I think that might be what's happening here.
Is absolutely what's happening here. And with a lot of this stuff, a lot of these publications and a lot of this research, it is exactly that.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of thinking, and it makes sense that this is the one that's so the idea that the incel communities blame women came from that confirmation bias.
Yep.
Fitting. It goes on. It says research at Cambridge University has noted a rise in violent acts in recent years committed by men who identify as involuntary celibates, and that's the one that is. Incels, Violence, and Mental Disorder, a narrative view of recommendations for best practices and risk assessment and clinical intervention, published in BJ Psych Advances.
That's also not something that had any new data from that research. It was just a review of existing literature.
Much
tailored, to make a specific.
Of course. So it's basically a lot of it came from that web crawler research.
Mm-hmm.
Of course. She goes on, however, that is not to say that everyone within the incel community is violent. Brenna Helm, a lead researcher at Michigan State University, says there are individuals in these communities who are hurting and are open to alternative avenues for managing their frustrations that do not include misogyny or harm to themselves or others. Part of the struggle in understanding this condition is that the incel community lacks faith in research and academia, viewing it as likely to be villainizing instead of helpful in understanding the true cause of their feelings and behaviors. I wonder why they would think that.
Right. Okay, now I see that it's just a couple paragraphs down is where they get to the actual surveys, I see.
Yeah. So, we just read why they would think that. So we look at the complex facts and figures, it says. An online poll of 665 individuals with Incel Complex. Again, just repeating, this is not an accepted mental health condition. This is something that they made up. So now they've just taken random people online and diagnosed them with it. Just wanted to point that out. Just
Yep. Like, who diagnosed these people?
Yep. They made up that, there was no process to diagnose or anything.
Right. And the research isn't where it came from. So this person has applied this term to this research without the, asking or getting permission from the researchers. So just to be clear, it's not the researchers that did this. But an online poll of 665 individuals with Incel Complex conducted by the Cambridge University researchers disclosed that the majority were males between the ages of 18 and 30. Around 68% of this group expressed having depression, 74% said they suffered from anxiety, and 40% reported they had autism. And then it goes on and highlights these statistics show that mental illness has a large effect on this community.
Notice how that's worded. None of these verbs are diagnosed. As far as I understand it, we're supposed to trust the science, but we're told they express having depression. They said they suffered from anxiety and reported they had autism.
I think they have to do that because they're not the ones that did the diagnosis and they didn't get their medical records.
Yeah, these are self-reports. But not only that, I don't think this is accurate. I don't think this is accurately reporting these studies at all. The Cambridge study is not the one that got that. This is completely wrong.
That's not surprising.
Yeah, those percentages, the Cambridge, this is totally wrong, totally misrepresented.
Yeah, but see, in this little highlighted section, she says that the statistics, they show that the mental illness has a large effect on this community. It's got to be true, Naama. Come on.
That's right. Incels are all nuts now.
She doesn't have to prove how. She just has to say that this is what it shows, clearly.
Yeah, what was I thinking?
Right. Well, and what really kind of bugs me about this is, let's say for just a brief moment, if all of this was true. All right, so about 2/3 of the group said they were depressed. About 3/4 said they suffered from anxiety, and about just under half reported they had autism. All right, these are not necessarily all causes. Autism can be, like, for instance, if I'm in a face-to-face conversation with somebody and I'm talking about something, like, most people, if they get a bored look on their face, you kind of notice that they're bored. And if they start moving around, fidgeting and doing kind of, I'm not paying attention to you as carefully behaviors, most people will notice. I don't notice that at all. I have to be told. And it's been a while. It's taken a lot of work for me to start getting a handle on, like, oh, I'm boring you, aren't I? And that's part of a spectrum of things that had me.
Yeah.
I got diagnosed this year. But in any case, that can affect your ability to socialize with people.
Of course it does. And autism, like, this is actually, it frustrates me that they're misrepresenting these studies so much, because I know the data they come from, and they're good studies. Like, one of them where they got that 40% number, I think, was taken by the community themselves, incels.co, the site that's always demonized, the site that all these studies like scrape to violent and stuff. They actually allowed researchers to take a poll within their community. That's where they got that high number of responses. And I think they reported that it was like 18% or something that were actually diagnosed on the spectrum, and then like another 20% that suspected they had it. So like, that is really high, and that's important to know, but it's not Incel Complex. It's just like important to be aware of, like, this might be an issue with this population, and it's all the more reason not to demonize them, not to stigmatize them, not to necessarily say like you're doing something wrong and, you know, you're a misogynist and that's why you can't have relationships. Like, it might be because you have trouble reading social cues because you're on the spectrum. And
right.
You know,
again, it's like calling somebody who has a disorder of the legs that keeps them from being able to walk a misogynist because they won't go on walks with women. Right. Oh, you won't go on a walk with me, you misogynist? Well, no, my legs don't work. Well, that's not it. That's, you're just a misogynist. Your legs don't work because you're a misogynist. Like, you wouldn't do that. It's ridiculous. But as soon as it's, you know, as soon as it's a part of a person's mental development or psychological development, we do. And it goes on. After stating all that about mental health, which the other two, depression and anxiety, those could be contributing factors as well, but they can also be a result. Like, if you're socially isolated and you're reporting depression, and somebody says, "Well, you're socially isolated because you're depressed," you know, could it not be the other way around?
Right.
Right. And could that not become an issue that is a self-fueling problem, where not that you are fueling it, but that the depression makes it harder for you to do the things that are required in order to socialize with other people, and that makes you more depressed because you're more isolated.
Yeah, I absolutely went through that myself.
Yeah.
You know, with this whole COVID thing, you know, and when I was separated from Mike for 3.5 years, and, you know, after a while, you know, people started to go back to work and life started to get back to normal, and everyone was having their normal family relations. And, you know, even during COVID, when people were in lockdown, you know, I had my coworkers complaining about their wives, you know, the people that they chose to share their lives with. I can't stand this. And I'm sitting there thinking, my God, I wish my man could be here so that I could complain about the stupid little things that he does, you know. But
yeah, that's when people do not understand what it's like until they've been through. I had a taste of the like separation anxiety, and it was just a taste. Like, we weren't an ocean apart, we were 80 miles apart, and 80 miles just felt like an ocean. I can't imagine. That must have been absolute hell, going through COVID with that, because you can't even get on a plane. You know, like,
no.
We could drive 80 miles when we were 80 miles apart, maybe not as frequently as we wanted, but we could do it. And there were some things that happened during COVID that maybe should help people understand what it's like to be socially isolated all your life, because a lot of people experience social isolation for the first time in their lives. They couldn't go anywhere, they couldn't do anything. They had family members in physical health facilities, and geriatric care facilities that they couldn't go visit, that they were worried about. And, you know, a lot of us lost people in care facilities. My mom died in hospital, and I never thought that would happen.
Yeah.
You know, and so all of that, like, everybody that's been through that should be able to think about, you know, what you experienced when you were isolated. And then imagine, what if you didn't have the tools to step back into your regular life? What if it wasn't a lockdown that was temporarily affecting you? What if this was just your regular life? You had this all your life. Wouldn't you be depressed? Wouldn't you have anxiety? You know, wouldn't you experience some resentment? A lot of us were angry about the lockdowns. Imagine if it was other people just refusing to let you into their social circle because you're weird.
I had that happen to me too. Yeah, well, not because I was weird. So,
it was because I was weird. So I had that experience.
You know, I got refused an invitation to Thanksgiving one year during this whole 3.5 years of hell isolation. And because this was an old coworker of mine, right? And because his wife was, you know, under the COVID paranoia, she didn't want unvaccinated people in the house. So he had totally opened his home to me. But because she was, you know, she, again, with the COVID paranoia, oh, no, I don't think it's going to be okay. So, so there's that, you know, but then, like, you're watching people get back to their normal lives. And for me, it was just like, there is no normal life because of these restrictions still exist, you know. So the resentment of seeing people come and go, they're going on vacation, I'm going here with my wife, I'm taking days off to go do this. And, you know, when you can't also enjoy the time off from work that you work all year for, you know what I mean? When you, because you don't have that person that you want to spend that time with because of these stupid fucking regulations that 3 years in, we know that this is all just bullshit and propaganda. You know, but yet and still, they're still holding on to them. And it was just, oh my God, it was like every 6 months, we're just checking.
Yeah.
Is it going to happen? Can it happen? Every time you hear a little something in the news, you know, and then you can't believe anything that you hear. I mean, the loss of trust that so many people have in these institutions that are supposed to be here, right? They're supposed to be here to help us, to, you know, serve us, and it's not what they're doing anymore. They're serving themselves.
Imagine if they were doing that to you your whole life. And this is what I'm thinking about when I'm looking at this research and I'm looking at this description. You know, they went on with this information from direct questioning of 272 persons self-identified with Incel Complex. Again, there was no such self-identification, so that first bit's a lie. Indicated that 64% reported having depressive episodes, 60% reported anxiety, 48% reported having suicidal thoughts, and 28% reported having PTSD. Like, all of these things, whether they're, again, it's very possible that, like, she's doing the same thing with this as the previous, where she misreported the numbers. But even if she was right, even if that is the numbers, this is not, people are not incels because they have these experiences. People have these experiences because they're in a situation that has been partly imposed by their living conditions and partly socially imposed on them. And how the heck did you just, you know, let that be your whole life and not experience some of these things?
Or it goes both ways a little sometimes. Like, you know, sometimes the certain things that they have, maybe a bad early life experience, PTSD, anxiety, depression, might contribute to them being an incel, and then being also incel and alone for years and bullied would further, that, and it's just like a self-perpetuating cycle.
So it does become again an issue of, like, if you're got a therapist that you're gonna try to treat somebody who's experiencing these issues, and one of the factors in their lives is that they're involuntarily celibate. It is fair to look at it as, hey, is that all these experiences, are they contributing to the involuntary celibacy? Is the celibacy contributing to these issues? And is there, a different pathway than normal that we might need to take to help this individual gain, what they're looking for? So this is where it gets into advice for completing a risk assessment. In their review, the UK researchers discussed aspects to consider when completing a risk assessment for a patient with possible Incel Complex. And
again, non-existent. There's two researchers who ever did that, because that's not a thing. Go on.
They never said that. Overall, some of the most important aspects to inquire about and discuss with the patient would be internet use, relationship history, misogyny, frustrations, mental illness, autism, and indoctrination into incel ideology.
I mean, well, listen, if we're going to go off of that description, you might as well call me a fucking incel. Jesus Christ.
Yeah, no kidding.
No, he was voluntarily celibate. Supposedly.
That outrage, me and my daughter alike are equally outraged, and probably have to jump off here.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just ridiculous. Internet use. So what? Is this what you want? You just want to monitor everybody's fucking internet usage? You just want to, I really feel that there's a little bit of that angle there, but I really would love to know how they are drawing these correlations, because there's no explanation whatsoever anywhere here. It's just all speculation.
Yeah, this piece is completely just slapped together, and there's no integrity in it at all. There isn't even a veneer of it. It's like barely even trying.
Yeah, that's why I looked at that as being similar to that phenomenon of by rote education, where the student has no understanding of applicability.
Remember, not long ago, barely a generation or two, people were judged on the number of TV hours they got in day to day.
Yeah.
Like, this person watches 10 hours of television a day. Can any of you even believe that? Shock, horror. You notice that's disappeared in this day and age. And it's been replaced with this little phrase, internet use.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Not because it makes you lazy and somewhat zombified like the TV arguably did, because the TV was never on demand. It's just whatever the powerful people happen to be telling you, especially back in the day when there were just 4 channels.
Well, I think it's like the demonization of, like when heavy metal was a bad thing, and it's, oh my God, yeah.
It's like the demonization of the printing press by the scribes who had total monopoly over which books could be written.
Right.
Like when this new thing comes along where almost everyone can get all the information in the world. That's going to make the palms sweat of the old media, and a lot of these psychologists in question putting this together are people who have only ever got their information from the old media. Where do you suppose government officials get their news? It's not the internet, is it? It's the television. It's the newspapers, and so. It's not even a conspiracy theory to say that people who cling on to the devices of the old world, like the old media, like television and newspapers and stuff, they're going to look at the internet and go, well, we have to curtail that as much as possible until we own it. And they're on a hell of a journey to own it, but in the meantime, they're demonizing it like orders of magnitude more than the TV was ever demonized. And they go on to exemplify this in these various other words they use in that list. Relationship history, well, yeah, they're incels, of course. It involves a fucking relationship history. Right. Misogyny, it's a similar thing. It's demonized in the way the internet is demonized because it works for the old media. It's one of their buzzwords. They like to think it's a new phenomenon that they're dealing with, but at the same time they say no, it's the world's oldest phenomenon. It's existed since as long as humans have existed. So they're always going to have to demonize misogyny.
But I think in this instance, when we're talking about incels, it's particularly egregious because they are completely dismissing women as being capable of not being able to have a sexual, being an involuntarily celibate person.
Right.
Like it's only a male phenomenon, and that's completely wrong.
As for frustrations, literally every human being has frustrations. You don't even need to grill them for that long to find out what frustrates them in life. It could be anything from I can't see my children to I don't like the way ketchup packets open. It can be anything. You can't ascertain anything from what any given person calls frustrations. Mental illness, autism. Yeah, interesting that autism is the subheading there and nothing else. Because autism is the only thing anyone can suffer from anymore. It's not like there's such a thing as the opposite of autism, and this couldn't possibly be affecting anyone. And indoctrinations into incel ideology. Again, that's sort of tautologous in the same way relationship history is.
How do you determine if somebody's been indoctrinated into incel ideology and what that ideology is? I think that's a lot of that's made up.
But how do you even indoctrinate someone into just being undesirable? Right? Like that's not how this works. You don't indoctrinate someone into saying that no one in the world is going to find me attractive. That's the complete pants on head, upside down description of this thing. This is not what happens. Is you exist in this world and you want a thing, you want a relationship, and you have this inability to form that connection with a person. It's not an indoctrination. It's not like someone can come in and mind meld you and say, oh my God, I must be so horrible. Do you understand how stupid it sounds?
Like I said, incel is a circumstance.
Right.
It's like being a virgin is a circumstance. It's like indoctrination into virgin ideology.
Right.
You see how ridiculous that sounds? Like it's something only a frat boy would say about a nerd.
Right.
Well, that's exactly what's going on here.
Yeah.
Indoctrination into incel ideology. When incel is just an extra layer of identitarian demonization that's applied to virgin males or almost virgin males. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, in this situation, exclusively males, because if we're talking about relationships and involuntarily, why can't I talk? Involuntarily being celibate, we're not talking about lesbian relationships. I mean, of course, it doesn't exclude that from being a possibility, but it's clear the angle that they're going for, and that is cis hetero men.
Yeah. I'm gonna interrupt and we lost Naama. She's a mommy and she had bedtime duties. So we are going to, I think we're going to continue this next week. If I'm going to get with her and see if I can get her back on next week. But because I do want to talk about like some of what they're saying with regard to therapy, and then I would like to look a little bit into the one bit of research that she was part of, because I think that is that is something that we ought to discuss in conjunction with this. The one thing I really wanted to nail down on this episode was this is something that is being promoted to the therapeutic community as a way of looking at people with this circumstance in their life. And I think feminism is promoting this worldwide. This is so they're treating it as a threat, and they're treating it as a reverse cause and effect condition, where they are looking at things which might be causes of the condition or the circumstance as or that might be effects of the circumstance, I'm sorry, as if they are causes of the circumstance. You're sad because you're lonely. Shame on you. That's the reason nobody likes you. Well, actually, sadness because you're lonely comes after the loneliness. Think before you speak, right? So those are the things that I wanted to get across here. And I kind of want to look at this research a little more, just because it may be complete bullshit. The article, not the research, in terms of one of the things that she mentioned before the show was that a lot of what was said in the article didn't come from the research that she was citing. Feminists do this all the time. And there's two things that they will do in regard to this. One of them is, like that web crawler thing she described, that they'll do something like that, and it's clearly just crap research. It's junk. It's not real science. And they'll write reports based on that, and then they will use those reports as the basis, the facts behind some other made-up type of research. So they'll say, well, we have established X, so when we go through data Y from this survey that we're taking, we're going to filter that data through the idea that X is true when we do our report. And then that report will be used as a similar basis for how they filtered the data in another piece of research. And pretty soon, you have 8 layers of bad research under which the original confirmation bias is buried. And the top layer that people start using as a basis for creating new therapies or determining how the police are going to respond if they find out somebody is an incel, that top layer looks very legitimate because it's heavily sourced, it's got good methodology in terms of how the data is collected, but then those filters that they're putting it through when they analyze it and determine their conclusions, those filters are all based on that confirmation bias that is now hidden under 8 layers of House of Cards fake research. And so when you look at it, it looks valid, but it's not. But you have to dig through 8 layers to find it, and 7 of them are now behind a paywall, and the bottom layer is so established that it is cited by numerous sources, and the fact that it's cited by numerous sources becomes a legitimizing factor in the research community. That's one thing they do. The other thing they do, and this is something that was Murray Strauss reported on this, and his whole career was derailed by feminists because they were mad about him explaining these things, is that they just basically report things that they didn't find. And this individual writing this story is doing both.
Yeah.
So, but with that, I'm going to get into our super chats. To my knowledge, we only have one super chat from ST007, 007. Gave us $5, looks like Australian. It says, have you ever considered that incels and male-to-female trans are part of natural selection? And I would say there's a degree to which you have a point. There's also a degree to which our modern society, which is influenced by gynocentric culture, has warped our selection process, and it's not natural anymore.
Yeah.
Really significantly warped it. Like the idea of romance, that's not natural. Not the modern idea. Like the idea of romance where it goes both ways is a little more natural. The idea of having gender roles is actually natural. That happens in nature all the time. But the idea of it being strictly the male gender role to maintain both sides of the relationship, that's utter bullshit. That's not natural. So it's hard to really call that natural selection. NobaFan21 gave us a Rumble rant for $1 and said, quote, experts seeing short men feeling rejected by women. Why do these men hate women? Modern women shuns short men. Experts, I see nothing wrong here. Yeah, that's part of the problem with a lot of this research. Like now, some of the research that this article is allegedly based on didn't say the things the writer said, that the research said. So we'll have to look at that a little more when we get Naama back on, because I can see we definitely have a little bit of an iceberg to dig into here too. But yeah, it's really ridiculous to attribute hatred as the reason why women reject men when the hatred doesn't exist, first of all. And second of all, the things that they're calling evidence of hatred don't happen until after the rejection. Let's see. Getting to the Super Chows. Super Chows are hard to find. I'm on a Super Chow hunt. Gotta say hunt carefully.
Yeah.
There we go. Okay, and scroll to the bottom, and then go back up to the done. Meredith G gave us $5 and said, HBR Talk 264, thanks for the interesting and thoughtful conversation about complex issues. And I like that, complex, especially like the made-up term Incel Complex. So just remember, when you see stuff like this, guys, there is no such thing as Incel Complex. It is a made-up term.
Mm-hmm.
Incel is a made-up term.
Yes. It is a made-up term, and it is not a term made up by the medical community to describe a phenomenon that exists. It is a term made up by a writer to describe a phenomenon she wants to convey to the public, and is using research that doesn't describe it. So that's really important. Zapier gave us $5 and said, incels don't exist. What people are calling incel is actually TFL, true forced loneliness. It's almost impossible to be an incel. You want sex, you hire an escort or go to a strip club that has a condom dispenser. Unless you're in a prison, physically or mentally disabled, chances are you're not actually an incel. The term incel is just a derogatory way of calling someone true forced loneliness. It's not even about sex for them. They just want a relationship, but even that gets demonized. Even by people like Blair White. Quote, feeling entitled to relationships is such a male thing. Yeah, this is a tough one for people, I think, to understand. Women feel entitled to relationships. If a woman hits on a guy and she gets rejected, she goes off. And I've seen instances where women have attacked physically and injured people because they've been rejected, and then the victim gets blamed, right? Now, I didn't hear that quote from Blair White directly, so I don't know if that was actually said or the context of it. I'm assuming it has to be something real, or it wouldn't be described here. But this is, I would attribute it to a degree to maybe attractive person syndrome, because this is something that, again, if you're 5 or below, you understand as a woman. And as women start to age, they start to figure it out. Like I would say my teeth hit the wall for me, and that makes a big difference for people. Although, like I said, I'm not looking, so it doesn't affect me the way that it would affect me if I was 20 years old. And when I was 20 years old, I had my pick, and so it was easy for me. And I had a lot of friends who were not in that circumstance. Like, I had friends who had physical features that made it difficult for them to connect with other people, and I had friends that had psychological features that made it difficult for them to connect with other people. Because I just hung out with everybody, and I liked people. I didn't limit myself to a group of people with specific interests or a specific level of popularity. If people were nice to me, I was nice to them. And that gave me insights just because I was able to see the experiences of the people around me into, it isn't this easy for everybody. And it's unfair to look at somebody and demonize them because they're lonely, they're sad, they're maybe angry at the way people treat them when they seek connection and they get rejected over and over again for superficial reasons. Like, you have zits, or you have too much dandruff, or you don't know how to speak the current language, the current slang properly. You can't dance. Like, all the things that women dump on men for. And it isn't entitlement to resent being rejected. That's natural. Entitlement would it be if you tried to force yourself on the other person. And that happens a lot with women. Women will blackmail. They'll threaten to tell everybody that you're gay or that you did something to them or otherwise humiliate you. They will guilt trip. They will threaten suicide. They will treat it as if the rejection never happened. Like, you're now part of their lives even though you said no. I've seen women get grabby. They will hit, kick, punch. They will create fake stories and sick other people on you. Like, that's entitlement. So if she said that it's a male thing, she's got it all wrong. That I think it's because that's an aspect of female experience that she's never had. And I grew up with my brother was a very adept musician, and not originally. Originally, when he picked up his first guitar, he sounded like a cat fight in the back alley. Like, it was awful. And
it's not a logically laid out instrument.
Right. And so he really worked hard to get good. And I mean, when I say he really worked hard to get good, I mean, imagine dedicating yourself to something, and you've probably had this, Mike, because I know you play guitar. 16 hours a day he would spend on that thing. He had, there's blood embedded in his first guitar from his fingers.
Yeah.
Like, that line played until my fingers bled. Yeah.
It's like there's no varnish left on it, right? It's just bare. Yeah.
And he went without other things that he would want to do to get good at that. And then he didn't stop with that. He learned how to play the piano. He learned how to play the banjo. He plays the bass guitar. He plays the harmonica, the drums, the violin. He learned a little bit of saxophone. Like, he really went all in for music. And his first band was locally popular. His second band was locally popular. The hard thing, he couldn't find people as dedicated as he was. It's just not, there's not a million people out there that want to play 16 hours a day and, keep going after their fingers start bleeding.
And most of them move out to the big city.
Right. And he did eventually. He went to Nashville for a while. Like, he's been all over. But when we were teenagers, You know what happens when a guy gets really good at guitar and he's got a band and he's a good performer and he can sing? Like, he got groupies. And, part of me wants to refer to them as gropies. Right? And I saw some of that toxicity. Like, it's a totally different... I had my level of popularity that was, not really... I wasn't aware of it when I was growing up. I always felt like an outcast until I went to my first high school reunion and discovered that actually people liked me, and I didn't know it. And my brother, he was aware. He was aware of he did all the social butterfly stuff that you usually would expect the sister to do. He was buddies with everybody, and he had a lot of really close friends, and he didn't party, but he went out with people and did a lot of fun stuff. And he did have some situations where gals were a little more toxic in their boundary issues, whereas I really didn't get a lot of that. It was a rare thing for me to experience it, and when I did, it was with a guy who was abnormal, as guys went. Had other things going on. He was missing some things that normally you develop to understand boundaries. And probably, those guys were victims of violence when they were growing up, or they grew up without guidance that they needed. And that's something like... Now I'm part of a huge community that is almost exclusively men. Like, there's a handful of women involved in the community, and we love it. We love you guys. And none of the things that feminists threaten us with happen in this community. And we're in a community of men who can be classified as malcontents based on their circumstances and the things that we discuss. And I don't see that level of toxicity. So it's definitely not a male behavior. It's a behavior that's more tolerated when women do it. It's a dysfunctional behavior, and you see it manifest more in women and girls than you do in men and boys, because women and girls can get away with it, and we don't criticize it when they do it. So I know that was a long answer, but it would be... I would love to actually have a conversation with her about this, because I think she's missing some factors that could contribute to a different conclusion. And I will bet if she was, if her attention was drawn to those factors, that might change her conclusion. She strikes me as somebody who thinks and considers things and doesn't just knee-jerk decide on something and then defend it for life. But Egregious Charles gives us $10 and says, "Here, have some money." And to that I say thank you very much. That was very sweet. Audit the Thoughts gave us $5 and said, "Gotta head out. I will check out this show and the after show later. Here's $5 for support." And I think that is all of our... that's all of our... Yep, that's all of them. Because, let's see, okay, and we have one that says, "Oops, sorry, I didn't mean to post that, so how do you delete?" And I think I can delete it. Delete this message. Yes. Ha! Guess what, guys? I can actually delete comments. I'm going to delete the comment about deleting the comment now. Ha! And now that I've deleted it, I can tell you it was on Rumble. So you'll see, I don't know if it'll show 2 messages deleted by moderator. But there you go. ST007 gave us $5 and said, "Blair White is man in dress. He says the right things, but he should not be allowed to speak on behalf of people that want to live a normal life." So I know everybody has their different opinions on trans issues. And I can respect Blair White's identity. And I will use she, her pronouns for Blair White because she does, and she's not demanding it. She's not going around shoving an ideology of you have to sleep with transgender people and you have to use the Z and the Zer and all that. She's not doing all that. What I don't respect within gender ideology in general, actually, not just trans. But what I don't respect within that is when the individual develops a boundary complex where you have to agree with them, like, and I that they can go fuck themselves when they do that. Like, so ST007, you have every right, and I respect your right to not recognize someone's gender identity and to reject everything about the narrative that goes along with that. But you also have to respect my right to choose on that same topic. Mm-hmm. So that's basically the way we do things here.
I think anyone should be allowed to speak on behalf of people that want to live a normal life. If only because that phrase is already loaded with the idea of what normal even is. I mean, I don't have children. I'm never going to have children. But if I'm gonna tell you that your children shouldn't be reading pornographic books supplied by your school, are you going to tell me you don't get to say that because you don't have children? You're not, are you? You're going to go along with whatever you agree with, regardless of the person who's saying it. And that's probably for the best, as long as you don't apply this hypocrisy that we find ourselves arguing against so much. If someone is making a good point, it doesn't matter where they come from or what else they're doing in their own lives. Like, when someone makes a point, ask yourself, what if that person never existed, but their point did?
Yeah.
You would have to argue the point. You would have to completely ignore the person who made it and just judge the argument. And that's how you should do everything. Like, no matter if it's someone you've never met on the internet expressing a point, or if it's someone in your own family expressing a point. Never go personal, because that does not help any argument, even if it's someone in your personal life. If someone makes an argument, address the argument. If you find yourself reduced to addressing the person who's making the argument, you have failed.
Yeah.
You are doing the very worst thing that they will do, and you'll notice them doing it.
Yeah.
Like, when you make an argument they can't address, they address the person making it instead. We call it ad hominem, and I know that's an overused diagnosis of the problem, but it's because it keeps happening. And you never need to reduce yourself to saying, well, this person doesn't live the life that I live, so I don't have to listen to their arguments. Well, no, you don't have to listen to anyone's arguments. But if you're going to adhere to any standards of argument, then you can't just dismiss the point someone is making based on the life they live. They're not connected. They're really not.
It's really important to point out again. Like, this is somebody that is a thinking person as well. Like, it's one thing when someone like Big Red comes along and makes a blatant, stupid statement, and we'll make fun of that because we know that she doesn't stop and consider information. She has a preconceived notion, and she will reformat the information to meet the preconceived notion, and then try to force it on you, right? And the thing that makes me amenable to Blair White and individuals similar to her in that they're maybe different from everybody else in a lot of ways, and their lifestyle is different from everybody else in a lot of ways, but they do say things that make sense, say the right things, as you put it, is I think that if I had a valid and rational argument against something that Blair White said, she'd consider that argument. And if she couldn't argue against it, she may change her mind on something. And if somebody is in that place where, they're gonna consider the information, they might change their mind based on new information, and they're not just, well, this is what I want to believe, so I'm going to tailor the information I take in to this belief. I've got to have some respect for that. Logic is invaluable. It's immeasurable in its value. You can't reach useful conclusions without it. And so you can't just dismiss somebody that uses logic and reason to draw their conclusions because you don't like their lifestyle. Yeah. Then we have another super chat. ST007 says people that cannot have children and families should not be allowed by people that can to have any power of them. Well, I don't think anybody should have power over, like, for instance, I don't think the government should be telling you where to educate your child or how to educate your child, how to raise your child, what your child can and can't read, imposing any reading on your child. The government shouldn't be doing any of those things. Right? Even if the government is pulling money out of my pocket to pay for a school system that your child can go to, I don't think the government should be telling you that you have to send your child into that school system. Nope. Like, two wrongs do not make a right. So that shouldn't be limited. Like, my neighbors that have kids should not have any power over how, for instance, I raised my kids or how my kids raise my grandkids. Mm-hmm. Like, none of that. It just shouldn't be. The closest we should have to that is it's fair when we have a community response if somebody is injuring their child. And when I say injuring, I mean, you see that kid come out of the house with bruises, and from having seen evidence that the bruises are caused by the parent beating the child. Like when it gets that pathological, then yeah, there has to be some kind of a rescue. But if you teach your child to respect the teachings of a particular church, and the neighbors teach their child that magic is real, and they can stand in a grove of trees and chant and cast spells, and it doesn't have anything to do with your church, one group shouldn't be able to tell the other group, you can't do that. Yeah. And again, the clarification, gay people should not be allowed into power. I don't agree with that either. I don't think having a lifestyle should have any effect. I don't think having a lifestyle determines whether or not you are able to act on logic and reason. Right? It goes down to this. Any power that you think people shouldn't have because of a particular lifestyle, our government shouldn't have at all. Whether the people in our government are gay, straight, black, white, left, right, up, down, I don't care. If it's too much power for any type of person to have, it's too much power for every type of person to have. So, and you can't really say that a trans woman can't speak on behalf of either sex. So you can't say she can't speak on behalf of women because she's a man in a dress, but she can't speak on behalf of men because I don't like her lifestyle. Like, frankly, she's going to have contributions to the discussions on gender issues for both genders, both sexes. Just nobody's an authority on those things. Like, we all have that. So, like, that's just, you can't exclude somebody from the conversation because you don't like their life. You don't like their life choices. That's just not the way it works. You can argue with them. You say, like, the statement that you highlighted, like, I can argue with that statement based on the evidence of personal experience and also based on some research that demonstrates that women engage in the same kind of predatory behaviors that feminists like to attribute to men. But that's using, again, logic and reason. And I think that's 100 times more valuable than taking somebody's label and saying, well, because you have this label, we aren't going to listen to anything you say. So, like, it's not. I guess the best way for me to put it is it's not useful in coming to conclusions that are factual and are going to help the movement, help men, help women. None of that to start dividing that way. It's helpful. It's useful to be able to analyze information and analyze conclusions that people draw, and criticize those and say, hey, here's what you're missing, or I don't see what you're seeing. Can you tell me what I'm missing, so that I can see if my conclusion is wrong. That's much more useful. That's how we get to a situation where we treat people correctly, in a way that respects everybody's rights, and where we look at the problems that we're dealing with in society and the solutions that we want to apply, and sort out the solutions that are actually going to help people and make people's lives better, as opposed to just going the authoritarian route. So there you go. Deadly Do Right gave us $2 and said, "Lost in the weeds. Let's get back on content, please." Content will return in the next episode. This is sort of the end of the episode. I'm just doing the super chats. But to relate this to the content we had today, saying that Blair White shouldn't be listened to on gender issues because she's a man in a dress and is therefore not one gender or the other. I think that's the conclusion that you're drawing. Correct me if I'm wrong. It's kind of like saying that incels shouldn't have any ideas about relationships and what they want in relationships because they don't have relationships with people. Like that's I guess that would be a similar, like you can't decide what you would like your relationship to be like because you're not in a relationship. Therefore, you can't have any say on relationships. There you go. So that's the end of the super chats, and I think the end of the discussion with regard to the super chats. I got through all of the super chows, and before anybody else comments, I think I'm gonna go ahead and take us out of the show. So thanks, guys, for sticking out the odd sausage. This was a lot of what was written about the incel population, I think, was kind of mean, although the research was clearly not black and white, and I want to look more into it. I will thank Naama Kates for being on here with us. She had to go, so she might hear it later. And thanks, everybody, for listening and for the interesting conversation. And good night, all.
Good night, y'all.
Men's rights activists are machines, dude. Okay? They are literal machines. They are talking point machines. They are impossible to fucking deal with, especially if you have a couple dudes who have good memory on top of that too. Holy shit, you're fucked.